Welcome everyone. My name is Christian and today we're going to do tips, tricks, and battle tactics for Game of Thrones, the board game 2nd edition. So this is a board game that's 3 to 6 players and there's currently 2 expansions out. Each expansion is a deck modification of the base game, and actually both of them shorten the game rather than make it longer, but they do make it more complicated. The base version is 3 to 6 players, and in any number in between those, you could have 3, 4, 5, and 6. The first expansion, Feast of Crows, is 4 players only. It's like no more, no less, only 4 players. It's actually the quickest version of the game, and my first game was about 2.5 hours, which is much shorter than the base game, which can be between 3 and 5 hours, depending on how good everybody is. The second expansion is Dance with Dragons, which is the 5th book, which is 6 players only, and is also shorter than the base version since it begins at a later turn and more army. Each player starts with more armies and more territories than the base game, and all the cards have been modified depending on which characters are alive and active by book 5. In case those who aren't completely caught up with the show or with the books, if I mention anything that could have any potential spoilers, I'll go ahead and mention that ahead of time. But in the beginning, we're just going to go ahead and talk about some basic strategy that applies to the base game and all of the expansions. The most important of which that I have found is that more or less every player in the beginning has 2 neighbors. Depending, for example, the Starks have both the Greyjoys and the Baratheons as their immediate neighbors. The Greyjoys have the Starks and the Lannisters. The Lannisters have the Greyjoys and Highgarden. Highgarden has the Dornish and the Lannisters. The Dornish had the Baratheons and Highgarden / Tyrell, and Baratheon has the Starks and the Dornish. So the most important aspect is to have one of your neighbors be your ally, preferably, obviously, and the other one to be your enemy. You can't have both be your ally, and you can't have both be your enemy. If both are your enemy, they'll easily be able to team up against you by using support icons and coordinated attacks to defeat you. However, if they're both your allies, you won't have anywhere to expand into. This game is all about expanding, taking more castles, and growing your influence. So the most important thing for you to do in the beginning is to think of who you want your ally to be, or at the very least who you're going to verbally agree to be neutral with, and then focus on one opponent. And then ideally, talk with that other person's neighbor. So for example, if I'm the Starks, and I'm going to expand towards the Eyrie, and I'm eventually going to come into conflict with probably the Baratheons or the Lannisters, fighting over maybe Riverrun or the Eyrie or Harrenhal. And what I may do, and what I've done this many times, this is the best alliance I've ever coordinated with, is I agree to allow the Greyjoys to take Seaguard and stay, if they stay on that side of the river. And then I keep Moat Cailin and the rest of the Eyrie and that area. And I usually agree that they can never put a ship into the Bay of Ice. Because if they have a ship in the Bay of Ice, that means they can attack Winterfell in any one turn that they want. Which is obviously, learning from Brandon Stark, something I don't want the Greyjoys to be able to do. If you have the Greyjoys focused on Seaguard, you can easily support them from Moat Cailin with support icons, and then they will be able to fight with the Lannisters between Seaguard and Riverrun, and they'll probably fight over those 2 territories. And by them allowing you to keep Moat Cailin, which is a relatively weak castle compared to Seaguard and Riverrun, which are both strongholds, It's a fair deal and allows the North more than enough territory to grow into. Well, you can negotiate Flint's Finger. I usually go ahead and let the Greyjoys take that as well. But the Eyrie is a great castle to take. And as you're doing better, you could even take Crackcall Point. And depending on how the Baratheons players, your victory could either go towards taking King's Landing or taking Dragonstone. If you keep Winterfell and White Harbor and Moat Cailin, you're already at 3 out of the 7 castles that you need. If you take the Eyrie, Crackwall Point, and King's Landing, you only need 1 more. And at that point, in all honesty, that's for when you to betray the Greyjoys and try to take back Flint's Finger or Seaguard, and then you have your 7th castle. Now, the exact counter to that can happen with the Greyjoys. If they have Flint's Finger and Seaguard and Pike, and they take Riverrun, they could get their 7 castles if they take Lannisport and Harrenhal and Crackwell Point and so on. So, for many games that I've played, if the Greyjoys and the Starks agree to that treaty of staying on one side of the river for at least the first few turns, they both will do really well. Because if the Greyjoys are fighting both the Lannisters and the Starks, they're not going to do well. The Lannisters are going to be able to hold on the river run and maybe even bottle them up by taking over their fleet in Ironman's Bay. So, for those 2 families, those are the strategies that I've employed. Now, for the Baratheons, it's important for you to keep a strong the 2 island nations, the Baratheons and the Greyjoys, it's very important they have at least some modest fleet. Because without a fleet, the units that you muster at your main home stronghold won't be able to move and take land territory since you need ships for transportation. Now, depending on the agreement with the Starks and how the Starks are doing, you can either keep a fleet presence in the Narrow Sea, which will give you a very quick ability to attack both Moat Cailin and White Harbor, both castles, as well as the Eyrie once you have enough troops. However, if you're on more of a neutral standing with the Starks, which is very common in the beginning, the Starks actually have plenty to grow into south and focus on the Eyrie and let the other families fight with actual human players. The Starks are just as likely to be fighting the Lannisters depending on how they're doing it with the war against the Greyjoys. However, so with the Baratheons, the main shift in strategy is whether or not you have a navy presence in the Narrow Sea, or if you focus more south and do the East Summer Sea, which will allow you to the Dornish area. For the Baratheons, try to take Storm's End as soon as possible. It's a completely open territory. You can easily support it with the ships that you keep in the Shimmering Bay, and is very important for their overall strategy as well as giving you flexibility to attack both the Dornish and muster new troops. A good strategy for the Baratheons is to take the Storm's End, Crackwall Point, and once you have enough support from your navy, go ahead and try to take King's Landing. But that will give you a lot of the points that you need towards the victory, and then you can either push on a land battle and take Harrenhal and the Reach, or you can push north and take the Eyrie, Moat Cailin, and White Harbor away from the north. However, that strategy is best not to be too predetermined depending on the strength of the other relative families. Now, the Dornish actually have the most straightforward strategy. They're on a peninsula, no one can attack them from the beginning, and your main struggle from the beginning is going to be whether or not you take Storm's End relatively quickly or not, or if that's something that's going to be a Baratheon stronghold. Baratheons, since they go first, are very likely to have it first, and you may not be able to defeat them within your first battle. But there's still plenty of castles like Starfall and Yarnwood to be able to pick up 2 easy castles before Tyrells can normally approach them. Once you have those 3 castles, you should be able to muster pretty well and move your way up, possibly taking the Reach or Old Town. A navy isn't that important, but keeping one in the Sea of Dorne and the East Summer Sea is very important for giving you flexibility of moving your troops around and taking Storm's End as soon as there is a good opportunity. Now Highgarden has a lot of flexibility as well. Highgarden and Old Town are both stronghold castles, so you can muster a lot of units and are relatively hard for other countries to take. As long as you control the sea territory around you, the West Summer Sea, or at the very least the Wynred Straits, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, you'll be able to have at least those units and probably be able to take the Reach relatively quickly. With those castles, you could either work with the Lannisters and have one of you take King's Landing, or you could focus your feud south and try to take Starfall and Yarnwood away from the Dornish. Just like I mentioned before, you should either fight with the Lannisters or fight with the Dornish. You can't do both, and you can't stay friends with both. You have to expand into one of their territories. For the Lannisters I feel actually have the hardest time in a 6-player base game. When it's 4 or 5 players, I feel they do a little bit better, but they're just sandwiched in with. They have the most potential enemies compared to any of the families, and they don't have any natural borders to keep them safe. They're going to have to keep a fleet in the Golden Sound for sure in order to support and defend Lannisport and the River Run. And if they ever want to take the rest of Flint's Finger or Seaguard or Ironman's Bay, they need to take that sea territory from the Greyjoys. However, you may want to form a peace with them and then focus your attention east and taking Harrenhal and King's Landing, just like how the Lannisters in the books did. Between having Lannisport, River Run, Harrenhal, Crackle Point, and King's Landing, you're well on your way to victory. You would just have to share the spoils of war with Highgarden if you ally with them. For the Greyjoys, as I mentioned before with the Stark strategy, I would either focus on the Lannisters or focus on Winterfell. However, I've had more success with the Ironborn with attacking the Lannisters rather than the Starks. Moat Cailin is a relatively easy place for the North to defend because they can keep ships in the narrow sea and be able to use a support icon from there, and you'll never be able to take those ships away. Plus, they could also support from both White Harbor and Winterfell and move troops in at their leisure, and you'll just be fighting back and forth. And Moat Cailin is not within any sea territory on your side to support. That's why it's much easier to keep your fleet in Ironman's Bay in the Sunset Sea and use it to defend yourself as well as supporting Seaguard and Flint's Finger rather than the isolated Moat Cailin. Learn from Theon's mistake and don't start a land war in the north when you can't support yourself by the sea. So we'll go over some battle strategy now. One thing that I like about this game is that there's no dice. It's a nice change of pace of just having your armies based off of just numbers and strength and strategy and your orders rather than just by dumb luck. Game of Thrones is relatively unique, and rather than having every unit be able to move and do whatever action that it wants, every territory that has at least one unit in it can only do one of 5 actions, and you place that order on the board at the same time as everyone else in secret. So there are 5 different orders. Each one has a star variation, which I'll go over. So the defense is exactly what it sounds. It gives you a strength defense bonus in that one and only location. What is interesting about the defense token is that it cannot be removed by a normal raid, in which I'll go over next. The raid a normal raid allows you to remove a support, a consolidate power, or another raid. It does not allow you to take the defense token away or a march token. A march token you can never remove, but if you use the star version of the raid, you can take defense token. Support is something that is very unique in this game. Two armies are attacking. If any of the adjacent areas or adjacent seas has a support token, all the strength that is in that location can contribute to that battle. But those supporting forces, they cannot be casualties of that battle. So if two battles fight, and even if they lose and they would normally kill a certain number of people, it doesn't matter. They don't have to retreat, they get to stay right there, and they cannot be killed. And you can use the same troops to support multiple adjacent battles. So supports are particularly useful. They're great for ships because not only can ships transport you to far off locations, the number of ships on in the area can just go ahead and add to your strength. In a land area cannot raid the sea. So if you have a support token in the ocean around it, only another ship could take away that support token away. So support is particularly useful, and even if the two families other than yourself are fighting, you get to be the decision maker and you could choose to support either one. You're not compelled to. Consolidate power just is a way for you to get power tokens. You get one for the token itself and one for the number of crowns that's in that location. You can also put a consolidate power token on a ship that is in a port, in that way you get one token only. You cannot use consolidate power in the sea zone itself, only inside of a port. And the consolidate power star allows you to muster an area or collect the regular tokens. You can only do one or the other. Wildlings. Wildlings are a non-human combatant that affects all the players. So depending on the icons that take place in the different phases that you flip the cards over for every turn other than the first one, the wildlings may attack if they reach the max power or if there is a card that specifically says that they attack. They attack at the strength at wherever they are on their track, and everyone in Westeros, all the families need to bid power tokens secretly, just like you bid for the different influence tracks, and then you reveal the number of tokens. The total number of tokens, if it is equal to or greater than the current wildling value, then the Night's Watch wins. And you flip over the wildling deck and you get to read it. Now sometimes nothing happens. There's silence on the wall and everything that you did didn't matter. Lowest bidder, everyone else, highest bidder, even if they lose, nothing happens. However, there are some really bad things that can happen. So for example, the Horde descends. If the wildlings win, the lowest bidder destroys 2 of his units at one of his castles or strongholds. If unable, he destroys 2 units anywhere, and everyone else destroys only 1. Wildling victory for Skin Changer Scout. The lowest bidder discards all power tokens, and then everyone else discards 2 power tokens, or as many as they are able. So there's various cards. None of them but Silence on the Wall are good. And this is where you may want to use your Raven in order to take a look at what the top card is. This section is going to be on bidding. Now bidding, you bid for 3 different tracks. The Iron Throne, the Fiefdoms track where you get the Valyrian Steel Blade, and the King's Court. All are important and all can be particularly important depending on your strategy. The Iron Throne determines turn order as well as determines all ties. So any future ties on other bids, be that Wildling or the King's Court or the Fiefdom Tract, all ties are determined by the king. So let's say the Baratheons re-win the Iron Throne in the bid, and then the next turn no one has any tokens and everyone bids 0. Well, the Baratheons, being the holder of the Iron Throne, gets to determine that one, their tie is the best and their enemy is the worst, and they get to position it however they want. Now, if someone had bid 1, then that person would automatically be first, but everyone else who tied gets to be ordered however the holder of the Iron Throne sees fit. So that's probably the most powerful one, just because it also influences your ability on the other one. If you bid high on one and you win, then you can give yourself a better position than you normally would on the other two. But if you bid high and you lose, you probably doomed yourself to a low position on all the other ones. The Fiefdoms Tract is the one that I usually pay the least attention about. It only determines military ties, and as long as you're a little bit higher than your enemy, that's really all you need to do, since that way if you two have the same force, you still win. However, having the Valyrian Steel Blade can be particularly useful, especially early game where the armies are a little bit smaller, but I wouldn't bid too much on that. Now, the King's Court is probably one that I actually favor the most, or at the very least a very close second. What's particularly valuable about the King's Court is your ability to use the star-powered command tokens. If you're at the bottom, you can't use any of them. And otherwise, and even if you have 1 or 2, it's very limiting. Particularly if you can't use any at all. Because not being able to use any at all is worse. I'd rather be able to use 1 star power than have the Valyrian Steel Blade, because that 1 star token allows you to do a defense +1, a march a defense +2, a support +2, a march +1, rather than not being able to do those things. So it gives you an extra strength in anything that you choose to have it in, rather than the sword only being in that one battle. So being star power is particularly useful, especially if you have a really small army and you want to be able to muster and use the consolidate power star order. So the King's Court, I would not bid high on the fiefdoms and save those tokens for the King's Court. So here's some strategy and attacks as you move your army around, and something to keep your enemy off guard. Something that they often don't expect is you chaining 2 attacks together. Now, like I mentioned before, the Tyrells can do this with one of their Sir Loras Tyrell can do this by attacking and moving that march order again. But what's particularly useful, if you move a sea territory and create an extra link in your navigation chain, and then suddenly you're able to send troops in a spot that your enemy didn't expect. And you're only able to do this by moving a ship first, and then in your second march, then utilizing that form of transportation. So you can really leapfrog across the map and take an enemy unawares by doing this maneuver, and I would highly recommend it. Particularly if you have a siege tower back in your home base that people may have forgotten about, that you're suddenly moving 6 places away because you have just built yourself a really long ship train. And what's interesting about ships is it can go as far as it's connected, it all in one turn. They're essentially a Stargate network that they step on the one boat and then they just appear wherever it's available. You can go all the way from Castle Black to Starfall in one turn if you had enough ships. That's a very, very special strategy. Siege towers should be used mostly in late game. Don't bother building them early on because while they have a 4 attack against castles, they defend at a 0 and they can't retreat. So go ahead and build yourself up some knights, but when you start planning on how you're going to get that 7th castle victory, that's when you start building some siege engines and be able to rapidly take some castles they're unawares. So this is where I'm going to go over the family deck. Every deck has 1/4 strength character, a 3, 2 2s, 2 1s, and a 0. Some with text abilities and some with icon supports. We'll go over some of the key aspects of the base deck. So let's look at the North first. Edward Stark, obviously the strongest, with 4 and a 2 sword icons. That means if he wins, you get to execute 2 of your fallen enemies, which is obviously very intimidating. And with the 4 power, you're going to want to keep that deck around. Robb Stark is a 3, and his text ability allows you to choose the area in which your opponent retreats to as long as the legal area for them to retreat into. So you can't force them to retreat into an enemy territory or retreat in an area where they wouldn't be able to move all their troops into. I haven't gotten that much play out of this because there's usually only so many areas you can retreat into. But what this is very useful for if you're planning a 2-pronged attack and you attack once and win, and then you can move your troops into another territory. Or if you know one of your allies is going to be able to move troops into that area, you can then go ahead and slaughter them. But I wish the Robb Stark card was more useful, but I never got that much play out of it. Great John Umber, he's a 2 combat and just has 1 sword icon. We don't need to go that too much into there. Roose Bolton in the base deck is kind of interesting. If you lose this combat, return your entire house discard pile into your hand, including this card. So just like how he was in the books with the diversionary attack, this is one that if you know you're going to lose, and you're doomed to lose just numerically, go ahead and play this one and you'll be able to get your strongest cards back. Blackfish, what's nice about this is he's only 1, but you don't take any casualties. Again, if you know you're going to lose, but you want that army to survive and to retreat, he's a good card to play as well. Sir Roger Castle, he has 2 fortification icons which block the deaths of 2 different people, and he has a 1 combat strength. Unfortunately, yet again for the Stark family, if you think you're going to lose, they don't have that many cards to help them win, but they know how to keep their casualties down. Catelyn Stark, she has a combat strength of 0, but if you have a defense order in the area, the value is doubled. So that's actually a pretty valuable card. Like the fortification icon is a +1 or a +2 to your combat strength. So you can easily make that a +2 or a +4, which will, even the +4 will only match her Ed Stark value. But that's a pretty good situational card. Let's go over the Greyjoys. Crow's Eye is their level 4. He just has a sword icon, not too much to talk about. Victorian Greyjoy. If you're attacking all participating ships, including supporting Greyjoy ships, add +2 combat strength instead of +1. This is actually one of the best naval cards out there. This is really good. It makes your navy twice as powerful and is very useful in order to defend Ironman's Bay. So definitely keep that on hand for when the Lannisters are bound to attack your fleet or you attack them. Balon Greyjoy is their next card, and he's a pretty tricky card. He's not that powerful himself. He's only a level 2. However, the printed combat strength of your opponent's house card is reduced to 0. So he's particularly useful against Ned Stark or other level 4 characters. So if you think that they're going to play that card, go ahead and use Balon Greyjoy. Theon Greyjoy, he's also level 2. If you're defending in an area that contains either a stronghold or a castle, this card gains 1 combat strength and 1 sword icon. So he's a little bit better at defending castles, but again, he's not a strong offensive one. Dagmar Cleftjaw, he's just a level 1, just a sword and a fortification icon. Asha Greyjoy, if you're not being supported, this card gains 2 sword icons and 1 fortification icon. So if you're kind of a lone wolf and your army is a little isolated in doing the attack, she's actually a good card for you. And the last one is Aeron Damphair. You may immediately discard 2 of your available power tokens to discard Aeron Damphair and choose a different card from your hand if able. So this is actually kind of like you want to see what your enemy plays first, and then if you have the icons to spare, you go ahead and spend them, and then you can put in the card that will make the most sense for that situation. He's not particularly valuable, but it could be helpful. Let's go over the Baratheon cards very quickly. Stannis Baratheon. If your opponent has a higher position on the Iron Throne influence track than you, gain 1 combat strength. Now what's actually interesting about this hand and this power is in the base game, the Baratheons start at the highest position for the Iron Throne track. So in order for this card to be optimized, you actually need to be lower on the Iron Throne track. I know it's nice to be higher on the Iron Throne, but in order to make your card as valuable as possible, you may actually want to bid low the next time it's bidding and just take a lower position. Renly Baratheon, who I thought would have been a great king of Westeros, is still alive in this deck. And if you win the combat, you may upgrade one of your participating footmen or one of the supporting Baratheon footmen to a knight. That's a really great power if you know you're going to win. Go ahead and play this card and be able to give yourself that extra supplies. Brienne of Tarth, a sword and a fortification, a level 2 strength. Sir Davos Seaworth, if your Stannis Baratheon house card is in your discard pile, this card gains 1 combat strength and the sword icon. So this is kind of interesting. If you've already played your Stannis Baratheon, make sure you play your Davos Seaworth after that. Next one is Melisandre. Unfortunately, she's a pretty boring 1 combat, 1 sword. I would really like to have her have something a little bit more interesting. And Saldor Sam. If you're being supported in this combat, the combat strength of all non-Baratheon ships is reduced to 0. That is a great card. It only has 1 combat strength of 1. But all you need to do is be supported, and then all non-Baratheon ships, that means Stark ship, that means Dornish ships, are all reduced to 0, which is going to be able to give you a strong advantage in naval battles. Patchface. After combat, you may look at your opponent's hand and discard a card of your choice. So Patchface has 0 strength. He's a card you would want to play if you know you're going to lose or you're absolutely certain you know you're going to win, and you can make it a little bit more costly for them by taking away that 4 power card that they've been trying to hold into reserve. Next we'll do the Dornish, the Red Viper, a great character in both the book and the show. He has 2 sword icons and a fortification, and he's their level 4, makes complete sense. Ariel Hota, he's 1 fortification and their level 3 character. Darkstar and Obrana Sand are both their level 2 characters with this a single sword icon, nothing too fancy there. Numeria Sand, if you're defending, this card gains a fortification icon. If you're attacking, this sword gains a sword icon. So a little bit flexible there, but with only one combat strength, you're only going to use her one victories assured. Ariana Martell. If you're defending and lose this combat, your opponent may not move his units into the embattled area. They return to the area in which they march. Your own units must still retreat. This is actually a great card. This is particularly useful if you know you're going to lose Sunspear or one of your other important castles. This is a great card to hold on to. And lastly, their level 0 strength card is Duran Martell. Immediately move your opponent to the bottom of one influence track of your choice. This is definitely a bitter pill to swallow. You either play this if you know you're going to win or if you know you're going to lose, because this doesn't matter if you win or lose. You immediately get to move your opponent to the bottom of just one of the influence tracks. If you have this card on hand, and for example, the Baratheons start out on the top of the Iron Throne, they always know that you're going to have this card in hand and you can knock them down to the bottom. Now, of course, if you knock them down to the bottom, all the other families move up one position for where they're at. So this is a particularly valuable card and used very well as a threat to discourage someone from attacking you. The next family deck is the Lannister family, the very dysfunctional Lannister family. Their most powerful commander is Tywin Lannister. So he's a level 4 strength, and he also has a text ability, which is actually relatively rare. Most of the level 4 characters are just brute force, but he's cunning. If you win this combat, gain 2 power tokens. So he's great. You'll be able to win. You'll have a really strong power value just by doing it. Now, if you want to crush the army and kill them and cause as many casualties as possible, send out the Mountain, Sir Gregor Clegane. He has a 3-sword icon. So if he wins, he will be able to execute 3 of the units rather than allowing them to retreat. The next level 2 is Sir Jaime Lannister. He has 1 sword, and then the Hound is a level 2 with 2 fortification. Sir Kevin Lannister has an interesting text ability and a level 1 attacks modifier. Is if you're attacking, all your participating footmen, including supporting Lannister footmen, add +2 combat strength instead of 1. So obviously use this card when you have a very large infantry army rather than knights, because that'll give you much more of a modifier for this. And the next level 1 is Tyrion Lannister, which his text ability is you may immediately cancel your opponent's chosen house card and return it to his hand. He must then choose a different house card to reveal. If he has no other house card in his hand, he cannot use a house card this combat. So this is actually a pretty useful card, but it's very situational. You know that they'll be able to win with a 4, but all their other cards are bad. Or if they have a certain text ability that you know will be useful and you want to counter, or ideally, if it's their last card, use this guy and then they won't get any text ability at all. And the last one at combat strength of 0 is Cersei Lannister. If you win this combat, you may remove one of your losing opponent's order tokens anywhere on the board. That's particularly useful, but unfortunately with a combat strength of 0 and her text ability is only if you win, you'll have to have really complete dominating an army in order to assure a victory like that. The last family deck is the Tyrells, which Mace Tyrell is their strongest combat strength. Ironically, because in the books and in the show he's shown as being not that intelligent. But oh well, I would actually think the Tarleys would actually be a better combat form. But anyway, Mace Tyrell, he's level 4 and immediately destroy one of your opponent's attacking or defending footman units. So this is a pretty useful because you get to kill one of them even before the attack. So win or lose, you know you're going to be inflicting at least some casualties. And with a level 4, you're probably going to be able to win as well. Now here's a very unique card, Sir Loras Tyrell. If you're attacking and win this combat, move the March Order token into the conquered area instead of discarding it. The March Order may be resolved again later this round. This is entirely unique. This is completely unique in this game. This is very useful. This allows the army that he attacks with to attack twice in the same turn. So you give yourself ideally a +1 march order. You attack an area and you win, and then you leave that +1 march token there, and then when it's your turn again, you can attack another adjacent territory. This really allows you to really blitz the enemy at a much faster rate than they would expect. And then if they don't know about this card or they forget about it, hit them by complete surprise and leave an area undefended. So this is an amazing text ability, and it's a 3 combat strength, so it's their second best card and a very interesting and unique text ability. Sir Garland Tyrell, he's a 2 with 2 sword icons, nothing really to discuss there. Randall Tarley, he's a level 2 with 1 sword icon, which I think should be even higher because he's supposed to be a really good strategist, but well. Alistair Florent, combat strength of 1 and 1 fortification symbol. Marjorie Tyrell is a level 1 and 1 fortification symbol. I really wish she had something a little bit more interesting text ability. And the last one, a level 0, Queen of Thorns. Her text reads, immediately remove one of your opponent's order tokens in any one adjacent to the embattled area. You may not remove the March Order token used to start this combat. So this is a very useful card and has a lot of uses. So let's say you're being attacked and there's a large support army that is being used to aid in the attack against you or in the defense of the enemy. By using this card, you'll be able to take away that support. You can't take away the fortification symbol that is at the area that you're attacking, but if you're defending and there's another part that's taken away, this is a way to give them a little bit of a bitter pill and to either help you in this victory or at the very least maybe take away one of their mustering or one of their defense tokens from another possible attack. So that is all the base versions of it. Something that you need to keep in mind, and is very important strategy, is that everyone that, like I said before, everyone has a 4, a 3, 2 2s, 2 1s, and a 0. Try to keep that in mind. The family cards that they have, they're allowed to hide, but once a card is used, they have to lay it out in the open. So if you see that their 4 has been used and their 3 has been used, and you know mathematically they can only add up to a 2 to their combat strength. And by doing this and essentially counting cards, you will be able to guarantee yourself a victory. The only way that you could screw up is that they have a support icon that you may not anticipate, or if they have a text ability that you forget about. So at the very least, remember that everyone has a 4, a 3, 2 2s, 2 1s, and 1 0. And if you have the memory for it, try to remember everyone's text abilities, but admittedly that's much harder to do. But if you keep in mind of which cards they still have left, particularly those of the really nasty text abilities, it'll give you a great way to ensure your own victory.